Tonight at 10, the Prime Minister wins a crunch vote on his Rwanda plan for asylum seekers as he heads off a Tory revolt.
The ayes to the right, 313. The noes to the left, 269.
Good evening from Westminster. So the Rwanda plan survives for now, and Rishi Sunak can afford himself a smile and a sigh of relief.
Also tonight, the UN General Assembly votes overwhelmingly for a ceasefire in Gaza as the humanitarian crisis there deepens. Ukraine's president at the White House, he tells President Biden if America fails to give Ukraine more military aid, it would be a Christmas present for Vladimir Putin. We talk to the man who uncovered the thefts at the British Museum. And more.
On BBC London, a senior officer warns of the greatest pressure on policing since the 2012 Olympics as they look at the challenges of recent protests.
Good evening. The Prime Minister has won a crucial vote in Parliament on his plan to send some asylum seekers to Rwanda, despite threats of a rebellion from the right of his party. Rishi Sunak spent the day trying to persuade Conservative MPs to back him. If he'd lost tonight, it would have significantly dented his authority. In total, 313 MPs voted in favour of the bill and 269 MPs voted against it, meaning the government had a majority of 44 votes. No Conservative MPs voted against the bill, but 37 did not vote. Let's go straight to Chris Mason for the latest in Westminster.
Yes, good evening. A day of jeopardy, a day of jitters here. The government deploying every tool of persuasion and mathematics. So the phone calls, the snatch conversations in the corridors, the more formal meetings. And on the mathematical side, ensuring everyone who could vote for the government was here in order to vote for the government. And to give you an example of that, the climate minister, who was, yes, at those climate talks in the Middle East, flew all the way back so that he could vote. That's how nervous the government was, despite the result when we finally got it. Quite an evening then, after quite a day. Excuse me, the man in the middle, the man of the moment. Can you make out the Prime Minister at the bottom of your screen making his way through the crowd? Almost 7:30 tonight, and result time.
The ayes to the right, 313. The noes to the left, 269.
The government had won. Minister, how big a sigh of relief are you saying?
Well, I think the government is pleased to have received a pretty clear 44-vote majority this evening. This is the toughest piece of immigration legislation ever passed in this country.
A win is a win, but this is pain postponed, isn't it? Because come the new year, this all returns and your party is divided.
Well, like any piece of legislation, as it goes through its final stages, there will be discussions with members of Parliament to see if there are ways of tightening up the language, improving the drafting to make sure there are absolutely no loopholes, and those conversations will happen in an open and respectful way in the weeks ahead.
Now, I don't know about you, but breakfast time seems a while back, but that's when the pastries and persuading were served up in Downing Street, ketchup and cajoling for a collection of potential rebels before the sun got round to rising.
The Home Secretary himself, James Cleverly.
By lunchtime, the debate began in the Commons, with the government making its case.
This is how we will save lives at sea. This is how we will deter illegal migration. And this, Mr. Speaker, and the House should take note of this, this is how we will break the business model of the most evil and perverse trade that we currently can see, and that is the trade in vulnerable people.
It was, he said, an innovative and humane solution, but the man who was Immigration Minister until last week reckons it'll fail.
The test of this policy is not, is it the strongest bill we've done? It's not, is it a good compromise? It's, will it work? That is all the public care about. They don't care about Rwanda as a scheme. They care about stopping the boats. And we are sent here to do that for them.
And opposition parties can't stand it.
It is a pathetic excuse for a policy, a foghorn signalling to the far right. It's too weak for some of the Home Secretary's colleagues, too harsh for a few exceptional others.
We learned tonight the costs are rising to actually about £400 million for a scheme that no one has been sent. More Home Secretaries have been sent to Rwanda than have asylum seekers. The Conservatives should be putting this into tackling the criminal gangs, the criminal smuggler gangs instead, rather than this ongoing chaos that now looks like it's going to carry on into the new year.
Here tonight is the challenge for the government. Look at the top left of your picture, one row down, a collection of Tory MPs not budging when others are voting. This is what abstaining can look like, and here is why they did it.
We had a meeting earlier this evening. We agreed that the Prime Minister had promised to tighten up the bill. We would take him at his word, so we didn't vote against tonight. We abstained, but on the very clear understanding that we would then table amendments to strengthen the bill in January.
But others in the party who backed the government tonight don't want the plan to change.
It's been one of those days in Westminster, febrile, nervous, gossipy, all of that. But actually, at the end of the day, the government got a majority of 44, which is pretty solid. There are plenty of governments who've gone through 5-year terms with majorities less than that. So I think this should give the government confidence and self-confidence to say, OK, we've got this more or less right, let's carry on.
So the government's Rwanda plan is still a goer, and that sound you can just about make out? A massive sigh of relief from Downing Street. Chris Mason, BBC News at Westminster.
Well, our legal correspondent Dominic Casciani is with me now. The Prime Minister won the vote. There is still, though, a deep divide in his party. Can he square the circle with this legislation?
Well, I'll leave the mathematics to Chris, because it's quantum theory what's going on over there at the moment. But there is a really, really deep problem legally here. And let's look at what one of the rebels said today, referring to one of the senior rebels, Bill Cash. He praised the government for offering Bill Cash bingo, chucking out all the buzzwords which fit their legal model: supremacy of Parliament, sovereignty of Parliament, seeing off the courts, trying to create a legal framework that would allow these flights to take off. But the rebels say this is all short of guaranteeing that flights would actually happen and that no courts could intervene. And the problem is this: there's a growing body of critics who keep saying to effectively the centre and the left of the Conservative Party and to the other parties, this is such a constitutional car crash in the making. If it goes ahead, you're setting up a clash with the courts. And Robert Buckland, the former Justice Secretary, perhaps summed up the dilemma best for the Prime Minister when he said in Parliament tonight that if the rebels are offered more, it won't work politically, it won't work legally, because completely blocking the courts would, in his words, set up a fistfight, not with the European Court of Human Rights, but with our own courts first. And that's the real problem that the Prime Minister's got looking forward on this.
Dominic Casciani, thank you. Well, let's go back to Westminster now. Our political editor, Chris Mason, is there. A sigh of relief, as you've said a few times, for the Prime Minister tonight. But what happens now?
Well, Sophie, here is my go at quantum theory. Firstly, we should acknowledge a win is a win for the Prime Minister. You might be watching tonight thinking that guy stands on that balcony and was stood there last night talking about great jeopardy for Rishi Sunak, and he could see his authority smashed to smithereens and all of that. That hasn't happened. Now, yes, as we were hearing from Dominic, it is pain postponed, but sometimes in politics victory is the absence of defeat, and the Prime Minister has avoided defeat for now. But as we were just hearing, and as was reflected in my report, you can see, you can smell the tensions within the Conservative Party on all of this. They are there for all to see. They are in primary colours, and they will return in January. The Prime Minister's challenge is to try and keep the show on the road and try and find a path through. That looks very difficult, but he is still going. And what could have been a massive moment for him in terms of draining authority has not happened. And so for that reason, there's a very good reason why he'll allow himself that smile. He's kind of made it to Christmas. He'll pick up and start again in the new year.
Chris Mason, thank you. An asylum seeker on board the Bibi Stockholm barge in Dorset has died after taking his own life. The three-storey barge, docked off Portland, houses people awaiting the outcome of their asylum applications and has capacity for up to 500 men. The Home Office said it was aware of reports of an incident on board. Dan Johnson has more.
We don't yet know his name or where he came from, but we can say this is the body of someone who reached our shores seeking the safety of asylum. We've been told he ended his own life early this morning.
At 3 a.m. at night, he was shouting very loudly and he was screaming. He was shouting for about 10-15 minutes and then he went quiet.
These fellow asylum seekers say conditions have deteriorated as the number of men has increased over recent weeks, now to more than 300.
There are more people coming in and the situation is getting cramped inside and they're not treating us good and they are very hostile.
Management is like we are prisoners and they're cops in the jail that are taking us, and the food is not good.
This barge was always intended to be uninviting, to stop migrants coming here in the first place, and supposed to be cheaper and less luxurious than the hotels they would otherwise have been staying in. But the line the government has been treading was saying at the same time as being basic and functional, it would be safe.
We've been saying for some considerable time, for months, that conditions like those in the Bibi Stockholm, like those in the Wethersfield former RAF base, which effectively resemble detention centres, are not suitable to house those who've been through some of the worst traumas.
It was controversial from the start and has been repeatedly disrupted by safety concerns and then a Legionella outbreak. This is not a prison. The men are not detained. They're allowed off to visit local towns. But there were doubts this floating accommodation block could ever safely house so many people.
If there are 500 people eventually on board, what will that be like?
I can't imagine 500 people living there because this situation will get worse, and when more people will come, there might be more incidents like this.
More people taking their own lives?
Yeah, it's going to happen. Yeah, because obviously people are in so much depression. They are far from their families, they're far from everything.
Now, everyone here waits for more detail about this death and what it could mean for other asylum seekers being housed like this. Dan Johnson, BBC News, Portland.
In Ukraine, the main mobile phone network has been the target of a major cyber attack. Kyivstar has more than 20 million subscribers and millions were left without phone or internet access. Some have blamed the outage on Russia, but Moscow hasn't commented. Ukraine's leader, Volodymyr Zelensky, is in Washington tonight trying to secure military aid from the United States. Funding worth billions of dollars is being held up by a political row in Congress. Here's our North America editor, Sarah Smith.
The fanfare that accompanies a formal visit to the White House cannot gloss over the fact that President Zelensky has come with a very big ask. $60 billion big.
Well, Mr. President, welcome back.
Now, there's no disagreement here. President Biden wants to send more military aid to Ukraine, but he alone cannot authorize President Zelensky's request.
Congress needs to pass a supplemental funding for Ukraine before they break the holiday recess, before they give Putin the greatest Christmas gift they could possibly give him.
What are the stakes today? The Ukrainian leader has to try to convince lawmakers in Congress that it's in America's interest to keep funding his war efforts.
How did the meeting go? How did the meeting go?
Republicans, in return, want significant immigration reform and increased security on the U.S. southern border.
Our first condition on any national security supplemental spending package is about our own national security first. The border is an absolute catastrophe, and this is because of the policies of this White House and this administration.
This time last year, President Zelensky got a hero's welcome, with lawmakers on all sides eager to help.
Your money is not charity. It's an investment in the global security and democracy that we handle in the most responsible way.
Now, falling public support for sending more money to Ukraine makes it harder for Joe Biden to keep his promise never to abandon Ukraine. Now, Presidents Biden and Zelensky are giving a joint press conference right now, and President Zelensky has just said that Putin and his allies in Moscow were celebrating when last week the Senate voted to withhold funding for Ukraine. He's warning that it is desperately needed before the end of this year, but there's only a couple of days left before Congress goes on a break for Christmas, and it seems unlikely this can get resolved before then. It's not that every Republican in Congress wants to withhold aid. Some do. They will never vote for it. But there are others who are sympathetic to Ukraine. It's just they say they will not support more money being sent there unless they get the immigration reforms that they are demanding. Now, in the press conference that's going on right now, President Biden said he is open to compromise on immigration. But this is an issue that has been intractable for decades in American politics. It's not going to get sorted in the next couple of days.
And Sarah, let me just turn to another story that's happening tonight in the United States, in New York this evening. The United Nations General Assembly voting overwhelmingly for this immediate humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza. But the United States, one of just 9 countries that voted against. Growing pressure then on the United States over this.
Yes, there is. And I think the administration is acutely aware of the fact that they could be losing sympathy. But it was over 3/4 of the members of the General Assembly voted in favour of an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. The UK abstained. And as you say, the US was one of the few countries to vote against. The US ambassador to the UN said that so long as Hamas remains driven by its murderous ideology, any ceasefire would be temporary at best and dangerous at worst. But it has to be said, the Americans are losing patience with the way Israel is prosecuting this war in Gaza, and that is becoming increasingly public. Just today, President Biden was criticising Israel, saying that they are now losing international support, and he described the government as one of the most conservative in history who don't want to see a two-state solution in the Middle East. And I think you will hear more overt criticism of the way Israel is prosecuting this war, even if the US isn't yet prepared to call for a ceasefire.
Sarah Smith, thank you. Well, in the occupied West Bank, where violence has escalated since the war began, Israeli forces killed 7 Palestinians in the city of Jenin, according to the Palestinian Health Ministry. Control of the West Bank, apart from East Jerusalem, was handed to the Palestinian Authority in 1994 to administer fully in some areas or jointly with Israel in others. But about 60% of the land in the West Bank is still run by Israel alone. Lucy Williamson has sent this report from the West Bank.
Since the war in Gaza began, Israel's raids in the West Bank have become more frequent and more forceful. The city of Jenin, now a weekly battleground. The leaders of Hamas, seen as heroes of resistance by many teenagers here. The road outside the main hospital littered with their own attempts at confrontation.
Well, the Israeli army operation is still ongoing here in Jenin. We've heard bursts of small arms fire from the city over here and some manoeuvring of vehicles up at the hospital near the entrance to the camp. Apart from that and a few groups of young men here on the street, it's deserted.
7 people died during the military operation today. Israel says its raids target members of armed groups, many with Israeli blood on their hands. But Jenin's hospital director told us the dead here included a chronically ill 13-year-old child who was blocked from reaching the hospital in time.
The persistence of invasion and incursion to Jenin and killing the young people, will make the people inside Jenin more angry and more angry, because every day we lost one of our friends, one of our peoples. This will not bring the peace for Israel. This will bring more resistance and more resistance.
A youth leader with the West Bank's ruling party, Fatah, told me that support for Hamas among young people was at an all-time high, and that the Hamas attacks on the 7th of October were a turning point for Palestinians as well as for Israelis. Many others here agree.
Palestinian youth had priorities and wish lists about owning a house or getting a degree. But after the 7th of October, I think these priorities have totally changed. There are rising voices for full liberation of the homeland through resistance whether that resistance is peaceful or armed.
Night after night, Israel's raids in the West Bank reinforced the message many here read in the Hamas attacks, that cooperation doesn't lessen occupation. Israel is fighting to eradicate Hamas in Gaza. Its growing influence here may be harder to destroy. Lucy Williamson, BBC News, Jenin.
3 teenagers who were driving back from a funeral have been killed in a crash involving a car and a bus in South Wales. 2 were 18 years old, the other was 19. It happened yesterday evening in Coedili in South Wales. 2 others have life-threatening injuries. Thomas Morgan reports.
He's a great boy, honestly. Hell of a boxer. He had a great talent, and everyone's just devastated because they haven't even started their lives yet.
18-year-old Morgan Smith was one of 3 teenagers, alongside Jesse Owen and Callum Griffiths, that tragically lost their lives. Almost exactly 24 hours ago, their Audi A1 struck a bus here in Coed Ely near Tonner Effail. They were pronounced dead at the scene, whilst another 18 and 19-year-old with life-threatening injuries were taken to hospital.
Morgan was honest now. He was some talent. I believe he could have done good things.
A gifted boxer, Morgan became Welsh youth champion last year and had trained with friend Rhys Edwards at Rwanda Amateur Boxing Club for years.
It's just, I don't think he's sunk in yet, but I know everyone's truly heartbroken, to be honest.
Locals living here say they've been left shocked and horrified at what they saw here late last night. But they have said they've raised concerns about this stretch of road in the past, and there have been calls for speed cameras to be installed here. As the police appeal for witnesses, tributes have poured in for Morgan and his friends as this community mourns. Thomas Morgan, BBC News, from the Cynon Taf.
5 men aged between 69 and 90 have been arrested and charged in connection with allegations of non-recent abuse at a private school in Edinburgh. Police Scotland say the crimes are alleged to have happened at Edinburgh Academy over a period of more than 20 years between 1968 and 1992. Thames Water has admitted that it currently doesn't have enough money to repay a £190 million loan that's due in April. The firm supplies about 15 million people across the south of England, from parts of Gloucestershire through to London, Essex and Kent. Today, the company's chairman said its financial troubles were partly caused by the regulator's decision to keep bills very low in recent years. Now, have a look at these treasures, intricate and unique. The British Museum is full of artefacts like these, but some have been taken. And today, the museum gave an update on their investigation into a former employee who is suspected of stealing or damaging around 2,000 items like these. The museum's chairman, George Osborne, says the man the museum believes to have taken them isn't talking to them, and they are still trying to establish a motive. Here's our culture editor, Katie Razzle.
And it's straight ahead here.
This is the man who uncovered the thefts at the British Museum that had gone unnoticed for nearly 30 years.
2 of the gems offered by this eBay seller had come from the British Museum.
It took an outsider with a photographic memory to spot that artefacts being sold on eBay belonged to the museum.
You saw that, and did you immediately know that's from the British Museum?
Yeah, I remembered it from that line drawing in the catalogue. Yeah.
Danish antiquities dealer Dr. Itai Gridell warned museum management in 2021 that a staff member might be stealing from their collection. Emails, first revealed by the BBC, show he was repeatedly brushed off.
There it is.
Dr. Gridell says he had unwittingly bought from the suspected thief many times. We've been filming with him since the story finally broke this summer.
Because it came from the British Museum storerooms. I found the name on a PayPal receipt, and I just went over the evidence again and again and again, and there was no innocent explanation.
Senior curator Peter Higgs was sacked by the museum. He has denied any wrongdoing. As chair of the trustees, the former Chancellor, George Osborne, instigated an independent review into what happened.
We're pretty clear that an individual who was employed here stole from the museum, went to quite elaborate lengths to cover their tracks. One of the things that we've got to get to the bottom of is exactly the motivation of the individual who we believe is responsible, but he has not been talking or cooperating. So
he said the museum had big lessons to learn.
A couple of years ago there was a warning and it was not taken as seriously as it should have been.
36 recommendations, a third of which are already complete or underway, include better reporting of unlocated items, more inclusive management and reviewing the approach to suspending employees.
I've made these discoveries.
Most of the report wasn't published because of the ongoing police investigation. Reading what has been made public, Dr. Gradell told me he's furious that the deputy director of the museum, who carried out the original failed investigation, has not been sacked.
They do not have a single word about anyone within the British Museum doing anything whatsoever wrong at any point in time here. Yeah, there's absolutely zero accountability for anything that has gone wrong here. This is a joke, this document, from my point of view.
Mr. Osborne says he doesn't want to rush to judgment. The museum is focused on recovering items it understands were sold for £100,000 in total. 651 of them have been recovered or identified. More than half of those were returned by Dr. Gradell himself. Katie Razzle, BBC News.
The president of a Turkish football club has been arrested after punching a referee at a match on Monday. The referee was struck by the president of the club, Ankaragücü, who ran onto the pitch after his side conceded a 97th minute equaliser. Turkey's football authorities have since suspended all domestic matches indefinitely. The referee suffered a broken nose and was filmed earlier today in a hospital bed with a swollen face, wearing a neck brace. More football now, and pressure continues to mount on Manchester United manager Erik ten Hag following his side's failure to qualify for the knockout stages of the Champions League. United were beaten 1-0 at Old Trafford tonight by Bayern Munich. Elsewhere, Arsenal drew 1-1 away at PSV Eindhoven, going through to the last 16 as group winner. Our sports correspondent Nesta McGregor reports now from Old Trafford.
Old Trafford has produced some memorable European nights, but another would be needed for Manchester United to remain in the Champions League.
United!
The German giants, Bayern Munich, waltzed into town confident. Their attack led by England captain Harry Kane. And there was little surprise. The striker had the first significant chance, albeit easily saved. As for the home side, defender Luke Shaw's effort had all the very high standards. Now, for some Manchester United fans, it will be the manner of this defeat. Even though it was a must-win victory for much of the 90 minutes, it didn't really look like that. And when you consider that that's on the field, off the field, they also have had their issues this season as well. Player discipline. They're also midway through a partial takeover, which for some people is taking longer than they would hope. And things don't get any easier. Out of Europe tonight, and then it's back to the Premier League now. And on Sunday, they have a very, very difficult trip to their arch rivals Liverpool, who just happen to be top of the table, and that's at Anfield on Sunday. So yeah, big night for the club, and Erik ten Hag would be eager to get a result because Manchester United, as I said, very, very high standards, and it's been a bitterly disappointing season so far.
Nesta, thank you. Weather in a minute, but first have a quick look at this. What's happening in the small border town in Scotland? It has been almost brought to a standstill recently because of huge wind turbine blades that are being taken through Hoyt one by one. They're 65 metres high and they're being transported upright as the vehicles squeeze past buildings, trees, lampposts. It's quite a sight. Well, they're being taken to a wind farm 8 miles south of the borders town. Let's have a look at the latest weather now with Elizabeth Rizzini. Hello.
Hello, thank you, Sophie. A very wet day for many of us, with long spells of rain towards the north and the east and some really beefy showers across much of the south as well. Heavy and thundery in nature, such as here in Plymouth, but also some rather lovely cloudscapes coming through too from our weather watchers. It'll look a bit more like this tomorrow. Blue sky and sunshine, an improving picture from the west, but it will be feeling colder with quite a chilly northerly wind blowing. Now, today's weather came courtesy of this area of low pressure moving just very slowly towards the near continent. All of these showers swirling around the low. Still this rain feeding into northeast England as we head through the rest of the night. It's been very wet here. The rain slowly sinking its way further southwards. The rain continuing across much of England and Wales. Lots of cloud here, so it will be a frost-free start to the day tomorrow. But we'll see the skies clear across northern Scotland. Maybe some patches of freezing fog, and of course temperatures dipping below freezing. Now tomorrow then that low continues to push towards the near continent, taking the milder air with it, but it will feel anything but mild, I think, towards eastern England with that raw, bitter onshore northeasterly wind and still some more showers. Plenty of clouds too for the rest of the day across central southern England, but elsewhere from the west it will start to brighten up for Northern Ireland, Wales, southwest England, northern England and also Scotland, but it will feel colder with that northerly wind, but the cold weather only brief because there's a warm front out towards the north and the west that will be pushing southwards and eastwards on Wednesday night, bringing some transient snow across the higher ground of the Highlands, the Pennines, the Cheviots and the southern uplands perhaps, and then continuing to move southwards and eastwards but weakening as it goes, again improving from the west as we head through Thursday, the air turning milder. We'll keep the milder air for the rest of the week. Sophie.
Elizabeth, thank you very much. And that's it from the BBC News at 10. Newsnight is just getting underway over on BBC Two with Victoria Derbyshire. On BBC One, though, it's time to join our colleagues for the news where you are. Good night.